Hello there, everybody. It's Darshana Avila here, somatic sex and intimacy coach. And today is the 25th day of Power to the P. And I'm coming to you a lot later in the day than normal. The flow of my schedule meant that I had to save my practice time for evening, and it was a really rich one. So it happens that I had yet another layer of motivation to commune for an act of mindful masturbation, self-pleasuring. And that was because in this course of study that I'm in, this training, we are mapping vulvas and the whole of the genital anatomy that those that have vulvas have inside and out. And so I had a surprisingly tender and emotional time in this very conscious container that I created. So the instructions were to look at, identify, touch, name the different parts of my anatomy in both a non-aroused and aroused state. And as I sat down to do this, I had a little conversation with myself. It just kind of spontaneously arose as I was speaking to my yoni and letting her know what was coming. I noticed that my tone of voice shifted in a way that was as if I was speaking to a child, not a super young child, but there was a softness and a sweetness and a certain cadence. And I recognized that there was an aspect of entering into this space for myself that was an initiation, one that I did not receive in my prepubescent years, and one that many of us don't receive because rites of passage is something that has been lost in our culture in a big way. And so we are not necessarily initiated into puberty and into adulthood, into our sexuality and erotic selves in those formative years in the ways that might help us to feel a different sense of connection and rightness. And so it was lovely to go through that process and to feel it. And then once I was through and had the chance to kind of connect, in great detail and even find a few things that were like surprising to me. I've definitely looked at and mapped my yoni in great detail before, but there is always something new. And so once that was done, I moved toward arousing myself, and that way I could do the second half of this practice. And so put on my good music, started to dance and just do some authentic movement and get my juices flowing energetically and literally. And in that free flow, I found myself standing in front of a full-length mirror, and I touched into a lot of shame and sadness, particularly centered around my belly, and secondary spot would be my thighs, for the ways that since my teenage years, since that time when the rite of passage would have been so welcome, I have harbored self-hatred for having a less than perfect body by societal standards. The fact that I have a soft, round tummy and full thighs does not necessarily meet the standard of skinny, sculpted, sexy that our societal norms praise. And so that's definitely fueled a challenging relationship with my own body. There was a point in my past history where I weighed, about 45 pounds or so more than I do right now. I've also weighed 10, 15 pounds less at moments in my adult life. And so those fluctuations and the relationship to my body has gone through quite a dance. And so I touched into the ways in which, even though I have cultivated so much more love and appreciation for my body, particularly over this last decade of a really dedicated yoga practice, it's still there. And so as I moved into my self-pleasuring, it was just rich and ripe with all of this emotion. A lot of tears came. I wasn't sure that I was going to continue. And I committed to myself that I wouldn't continue just for the sake of the practice or just for the sake of this recording even. I really just, I had my moment of being like, screw it all. Like, this is for me or it's not. And I was again surprised to see that I really wanted to stay in connection. Surprised maybe isn't even the word. I was delighted on a certain level to see that I really wanted to stay in connection to all that was moving through me. And the entire time, at a minimum, I had a hand cupped over my yoni, if not more. So I kept a physical connection and stayed present and connected to all these waves of emotion. Noticed when they started turning into more of that like ecstatic erotic flow where there were ripples up my spine, or this desire to undulate or thrust. There was a lot of pelvic thrusting that I was doing at a certain point, and it was a very different way of masturbating than normal. Not at all about stimulation, but definitely about vibration and motion and movement, so that I was moving this energy through. And I stayed in that space for about an hour and all the waves of emotion. And the intention of the exercise was to build the arousal, but not necessarily orgasm or have a release, so that I could then go ahead and map what I was seeing in that aroused state. And so after the energy, hit a dip that felt more like a plateau for a little bit, once I stayed with it, I went back and sat myself in front of the mirror with the light and looked again in detail. And what I noticed was a little bit more fullness in my outer labia. My clitoral shaft was more pronounced. There was some different internal texture, particularly around my G-spot, as it had gotten more engorged and more of my lubrication had come in. So I was noticing all of these things. And again, a certain sadness and frustration and shame arose, because I also had the opportunity to look at my vulva during and after some particularly ecstatic partnered lovemaking. And so I know what she looks like in those states. And in my self-pleasuring, I had not gotten near that level of arousal, at least not today, but often not in other cases. It's a different experience. And so in my self-pleasuring, I met today with a lot of my self-judgment and a lot of the ways that I carry a shame and the feeling of less than, unworthy, not good enough around my sexuality. And as I sat with these emotions and did a little writing about it, I began to think about this video and this blog, what I would share. And I didn't feel an ounce of shame when I considered speaking this. And that really inspired me. Because I know that I'm not the only person who's contending with my flavors of this struggle. We all have them. All of us have the pieces of ourselves that we wish were different, or the ways in which we're holding ourselves to a standard that isn't necessarily ours, that comes from the outside, from the conditioning we're subject to. And so I really wanted to give a voice to this, and do so from a place of compassion and solidarity and love. And I ended with my hands just gently over my yoni and my heart, repeating how much I loved myself. And also, if you're familiar with it, I repeated the Ho'oponopono prayer. I love you. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Thank you. And I just said that over and over, to my belly, to my yoni, to my thighs, to my heart, to the whole of myself. So it was an incredibly rich and very vulnerable practice. And I'm happy to have the chance to share it here with you. It feels really important, particularly as we're just a few days away from the end of this journey. And I'm appreciating the vast range that we've been able to cover. So thanks for following along and listening in. Let me hear from you if there's something in this share that has touched you, or something from your own experience that you would like to share with me. And I will be back with you tomorrow for our next installment. Thanks. Take care.